Exclamation point.
He throws wide open. It's complete and all the way down the sideline. Michael Weiss, touchdown Sanford.
He's going to heave it towards the end zone. It's going to go around the 5. The ball's tipped in the air, still being tipped. Caught! Touchdown! South Dakota!
You are listening to The Review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Review. It's the Online Sports Guys college football podcast featuring us, the Online Sports Guys. This week, it's only the two of us here to start things off. Brother Wilkie will join us with Wilkie's World a little bit later in the show. Brother J-Dub, he's kind of on the injured list this week, out with an undisclosed injury. Upper body injury.
But if you've seen it, though, you know what's there, though.
A bit of an upper body injury that he's trying to deal with.
He's day-to-day, aren't we all?
Yes, he is day-to-day in the literal sense of the term. John, another really interesting week in college football, but we're kind of at the point of the season where they're all kind of a little bit weird in their own separate ways. I guess we ought to start this week with a game that I predicted in my weekly column on theonlinesportsguys.com.
Excellent.
And that was Baylor knocking off 8th ranked, and I'm not sure they quite earned that, but the Oklahoma Sooners, with a really nice win for Dave Aranda and company. They end up beating Oklahoma 27-14. Abram Smith, 20 carries, 148 yards. Unbelievably good job by the defense for the Bears. They held Caleb Williams to 146 yards and 2 interceptions. Briefly replaced by Spencer Rattler, who
you mean Heisman Trophy winner Spencer Rattler?
Yes, who somehow was even less effective.
4 of 6 for 36. Thanks for coming by with a QBR of 15.
And basically, this throws the college football playoff into a bit of a monkey wrench in that it doesn't look like we're going to have a Big 12 team unless the Oklahoma State Cowboys manage to run the table. Lincoln Riley was livid after the game.
Well, wouldn't you? And he wasn't the only coach who was either A, livid, or B, the fans should be livid at for this kind of a performance. You know, when you go into Waco and Baylor rushes for just under 300 yards on you, that doesn't speak well. You mentioned Smith at 148. Jerry Bohannon had 9 for 107.
And two touchdowns.
And Oklahoma on the day finishes with 260 net yards of offense. That's it. That's it. On the day, 260. That's it. And I'd be just as hot too, but you get your first loss of the season at a very inopportune time. You're now 9-1, 6-1 in conference. And Oklahoma is going to plummet in the standings for the CFP. Baylor right now at 13 might move up a couple of spots. And, it might be one of those 10-11 kind of deals or 11-12 where Oklahoma is now behind Baylor because of the result. But this was a clunker. Wasn't the only clunker of the weekend, but could not have happened at the worst time if you're a fan of OU football.
Yeah, the Bears were coming off of a 30-28 loss at TCU last week. Under an interim coach, TCU, that is. And they bounced back and played one of the best games they've played all season. They've been a dangerous team all along, performing very, very well throughout the season. But Oklahoma's been squeaking by. I got the impression that they were going to have this game at some point during the season, and sure as heck, they had it.
Yeah. And this was, like I said, this was not the time to put up a clunker considering everything that was going on around them in the CFP. And once again, I think it raises questions about the quarterback position there at OU because, we were all led to believe that Spencer Rattler was going to win the Heisman Trophy. Then when
Just
Oklahoma,
like everybody else who plays quarterback for Lincoln Riley.
That is true. And then when you have Spencer Rattler throw up a clunker, then Caleb Williams comes in. Then Caleb Williams is supposed to win the Heisman Trophy. Then Caleb Williams puts up a clunker. You bring Spencer Rattler back in, and he's just as equally ineffective in a game against Baylor. So it's an interesting dynamic right now. And you have two quarterbacks who have been exposed by the defenses that OU has played to where there really isn't a whole lot of trust in either one. And obviously that doesn't bode well for the remainder of the regular season if you're a fan of OU football. And it's obviously a point of concern for this offense. Once again, when the team that you play against rushes for more yards than you had total, that speaks well for the defense that was squared away by Baylor and for the game planning on the offensive side of the ball. You see, Rosie agrees with me. This is where things go these days.
The Sooners finish up their season here. They've got 2 games left, with Iowa State making the trip to Norman, and then the season ends with a trip to Oklahoma State and Bedlam.
Mm-hmm. And it probably will be for more reason than one.
There's no guarantee Oklahoma's going to win either one, both, or they could win one, they could win both, they could win none of those games and end up 9-3.
Yeah.
Not the outcome that anybody was expecting at all whatsoever.
No.
And speaking of Big 12 teams that are going to be leaving soon to join the SEC.
And the jokes are there. We've seen them. We're not going to repeat them.
Their partners in crime, the Texas Longhorns, let's just say they threw up another clunker as well, because they had an opportunity to play the Kansas Jayhawks in Austin, a game that nobody in their right mind would have ever picked Kansas to win, because Texas was favored by 30 some odd points, and yet Texas somehow lost.
Yeah. And
they were down, not only that, they were down 35-14 at the half.
Yeah. And the fact that you had a Kansas team put up, and this is the sentence that I'm going to say here, that you had a Kansas team put up the numbers that they did on Texas and end up with the result that you had. And you could kind of tell that there was going to be that moment in the game where you knew that the depth of Texas would try to catch up with Kansas and try to get everything all squared away. And you look at, it was 14-0 after one, 35-14 at the break. And then, the depth and the adjustments and all that kind of stuff. Remember, Texas had to finish this game without 3 of their top running backs.
Well,
and
Kansas started their third-string quarterback, Jalen Daniels, who ended up throwing for 3 touchdowns.
I know. And, when you have Casey Thompson, who is trying to throw with a hand that has a bad thumb on the throwing hand, that's another issue that Texas was having to try to game
Thompson
plan around.
threw for 6 touchdowns.
I know. Throws for 358 and 6 with a bad thumb, and having to do things without your running game. Your running game, you end up with, on the day, 574 yards of offense, 410 of that through the air. And with Bijan Robinson before he was injured, Roschon Johnson, Jonathan Brooks, Casey Thompson, and Hudson Card. You take out Bijan Robinson, and you've run for less than 100 yards, 94 yards after Bijan Robinson was injured and removed. So I can't give Lance Leipold enough credit in all of this for having the guts to stick with it. And I give his defense a lot of credit, because that in these situations where teams are slinging it all around the yard, you just want to keep everything in front of you and make sure that nothing gets behind you. And also because of being on the road and being in a tough situation where you were in overtime, I had the feeling that they were going to go for 2 in that first overtime, so you don't get caught in that 9 overtime morass like we saw with Penn State earlier this year. You take your best 2-point play, run your best 2-point play, you get it done, you get out of there with a win. 0 for 3 lifetime Kansas has been there in Austin. and you come out of there with a win. It's a great win for this program. And I think that when you're looking at Kansas now, you're looking at a team that I think they can look at their head coach. And if you hadn't been believing in what Lance Leipold was trying to present to you as a student athlete, it's like, okay, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to change the culture, do all these kinds of positive things to get moving in the right direction. It's wins like this that you can build on and that you can recruit from. Because remember, we're a month away from National Signing Day. And if someone from KU comes at your door and says, hey, look, we beat Texas, that to me could be a drawing card for Kansas football. It would be very, very interesting to see what happens in this month leading up to early signing day, to see if a moment like what we had this past weekend can help propel you going forward.
Yeah, and I just want to mention, too, that 2-point conversion in overtime for the win, a pass that ended up being batted around and landed in the hands of Jared Casey, who had played exactly 0 snaps on offense for the Kansas Jayhawks this season until that play.
Daniels, end zone, caught! Kansas wins it!
That's how it happens, and I love every minute of it.
And apparently there's video of his parents in the stands reacting when their son caught the ball, and they went bananas.
As they should have. It was awesome.
Still can't believe that actually happened, and yet it did. Speaking of the Big 12 and the team that's probably in the driver's seat now for any potential college football playoff berth for them, the Oklahoma State Cowboys with a humongous performance against TCU. They beat the Horned Frogs 63-17.
Yeah.
Just a dominating performance. Spencer Sanders, 17 for 25, 235 and a touchdown, 134 yards rushing for Dominic Richardson and a couple of touchdowns. The Cowboys have been getting by for the most part on the strength of their defense this season up until this point.
Yeah.
They look really good on offense this week.
Well, and I also think, I know that a lot of us look and see if you're going to get the assistant bump or the new coach bump or whatever, and you could tell right now that there's going to be a lot for TCU to work on in the offseason. It was just one of those where they were absolutely outclassed, and I think that it was another example where you could see where TCU has fallen, and especially when you get 63 put on you. That's a tall order. And I'm gonna just go ahead and say right now, I don't know if you're a fan of TCU football, if you should expect a whole lot for the remainder of the regular season.
The flip side of that being, if you're an Oklahoma State Cowboy fan, you should expect a lot as they finish up their season with a road trip out to Lubbock and a game against Texas Tech this coming weekend. And they finish, as we mentioned earlier, they finish with a game against Oklahoma, but it's in Stillwater. And there could be a lot of things riding on the outcome of that game, John.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, as we look at what could be at stake, is it that, coming in from lane 8 berth into the CFP, but you're going to have to win impressively. And I think that if you're Oklahoma State, you're going to have to put a lot of points on the board against Oklahoma in Bedlam. So, if I was to sit there and look at my favorite Thanksgiving side dishes, I might put the macaroni and cheese on the over in that game when we get to that point.
Indeed, we might. Let's move on to the other conference with a lot of turmoil and some really interesting races coming down the home stretch here. Let's talk a little bit of Big Ten football. The Michigan Wolverines, the story of the conference this week, as they managed to eke out a win in Happy Valley versus Penn State, 21-17, in a game that I really thought Michigan was going to somehow blow.
Yeah, I thought so too. And when, Penn State was working in the fourth quarter and had the lead, then you're thinking, okay, this would be that moment where James Franklin comes up and bites Jim Harbaugh and sends Michigan spiraling down. I still think that moment's coming. And for if you're a fan of Michigan football, I think that you escaped in this one. I don't think that your position.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the unwritten rules of college football over the last couple seasons is that a Jim Harbaugh team is probably going to do something dumb that he overthought and end up losing a game.
Yep, and they're at Maryland next week. So if it happens in College Park, it happens in College Park. More than likely, it's going to happen Thanksgiving weekend at the Big House, as Ohio State's coming to town to play the school from the north, as they say. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen in 2 weeks because of all of the hype that's going to surround it. It's going to end up being a knockout game in the CFP. And, conventional wisdom for me says that Ohio State is going to be the one that comes out on top.
Just because that's kind of what they do. And the winner of that matchup will likely end up in the Big Ten championship game against better than average, but typical Wisconsin or Iowa team. And I don't see either one of them jumping up and biting any of those teams in the rear end.
Nope.
It makes for some interesting conversation. The Ohio State Buckeyes, they kind of got on track with a nice win over Purdue, who was coming off of a huge win over Michigan State in what basically amounted to a track meet.
Yeah.
59-31. Huge game again for C.J. Stroud, 361 and 5 touchdown passes. But props to Purdue. Aiden O'Connell put up a fight. He went 40 for 52, 390, and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, but I think that right now what you're looking at are those teams at the top that are chasing after that clause after everybody mentions your name, Heisman Trophy candidate, Heisman Trophy finalist, whatever. I think that Stroud is going to be in that discussion, and especially when you put up numbers like this. In a track game where you're up 45-17 at the break and you kind of cruise from there, 59-31, and that was over very, very early. And right now you're just looking at Ohio State coming into the CFP as number 4 coming into this weekend, and Purdue at 19. Obviously, they're going to drop some as well. But now these are the showcase games that if you have a team and you have a player that you want to showcase for a trip to New York City, this is when you do it. And Stroud getting throwing for 5 is definitely one of those moments where that can happen.
Yeah, right now the Buckeyes look like an all-offense, very little defense kind of team, which may be enough to get them out of the Big Ten and into the playoff, but I'm not so sure it's going to stand up when you come up against the Georgias or Alabamas of the world. We'll have to see. Really not too many other standout games in the Big Ten. Michigan State took care of business, a 40-21 win over Maryland. Puts Michigan State in position to be there just in case Michigan manages to beat Ohio State, and then boom, all of a sudden you're talking about Sparty playing in the Big Ten championship game.
And obviously keeping an eye on those 3 that are as bunched as tightly as they can be right now. And I think the 3 of them, there's going to be some scoreboard watching. And I think that if there's an opportunity for any of those folks to put up a number, they're going to do it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Indeed. Before we go into the SEC and some of the other games going on in college football, we're going to toss it over to our friend, Brother Wilkie. For our segment, we're trying to see if the title sticks, called Wilkie's World, where Wilkie's going to talk this week about some Big Ten action, some Big 12 action, and a shout out to the Kansas Jayhawks. Take it away, Brother Wilkie.
Well, thanks, guys. And first of all, the eyes of Texas have been blackened throughout the season. And great example in Austin last night, Saturday night against the Kansas Jayhawks. And finally, something to celebrate before basketball is tipped off in Lawrence, as the basketball season is tipped off. But something to cheer about by the football team as they go down to Austin, Texas, where it was defensive optional, I'm sure, for a 57-56 win over the Longhorns, and probably one of the worst losses the Horns have suffered at DKR in far as I can remember. And what that means is Texas now has a 5-game losing streak after starting off 4-1 on the year. And that's the worst losing streak by a Texas team since 1956, which I believe was Darrell Royal's first year at Texas. So they got to win 2 games to be bowl eligible now. I'm not sure that's going to get done. And Steve Sarkisian's first season, look, nothing's going to happen to him. But if this persists in the next season, there might be some buyer's remorse there in Austin, Texas. But great win for the Kansas Jayhawks, getting it done in Austin. And let's see if this is kind of the beginning of some good things happening for the Jayhawks. Elsewhere in the Big 12, it wasn't a much better day for the Oklahoma Sooners as they went into Waco, Texas and suffered their first loss of the season to the Baylor Bears 27-14. Oklahoma State won yesterday, so now, boy, is that shaping up for an epic bedlam game between the Sooners and the Cowboys. However, when they play in a couple of weeks for, I guess, the number 1 seed going into the Big 12 championship game, those play next week in Dallas, which is a real interesting scenario, especially if OSU wins that first game of the Bedlam game and then has to go back and play OU again. I think that's going to create an interesting scenario for both those teams. How do you prepare for the next week? Anyway, there's still another week of games to be played, so anything can happen. But with the way it shapes up now, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State would meet in the Big 12 title game a week after their Bedlam game, their annual Bedlam game. But Baylor now just has 2 losses in conference, and they went out. If Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, Baylor sneaks in there and plays in the title game. So it's going to be an interesting close to the Big 12 season. And finally, the Big Ten has gotten very, very interesting, especially in the eastern side of the division. We have a showdown next week, or this coming Saturday, between Ohio State and Michigan State. And if Michigan State should win that game, it doesn't matter who really wins. Ohio State has no loss in the conference. But if Michigan State wins that game, Michigan-Ohio State becomes an even larger game. And Michigan State obviously closing the season against Penn State, who's 4th in the standings right now. It's a crapshoot who's going to come out of that division to play in the Big Ten title game, probably against Wisconsin, who's really playing the best football of the season right now. Of course, in the SEC, you have Alabama and Georgia. Looks like they're going to be crashing heads in the SEC title game. Georgia's already clinched. Alabama's all but clinched. And those 2 teams just look awesome. But I want to throw out a scenario for you because this is kind of shaping up to be a possible scenario, especially if Ohio State and Michigan play in their annual at the end of the season for the Eastern Division, and let's say Michigan wins. Do you see a scenario where the playoff for the college football playoff would be Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State? It's possible because we don't know about Cincinnati right now. We don't know how obviously the committee does not like Cincinnati being in the mix. And I just don't see them putting them anywhere above 5, even if they do finish out the season. I think the committee is hoping that there's an avenue or a road for those 4 teams, Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, to play in the college football playoff, because it would be epic. You have the 2 best teams in the SEC, arguably the 2 best teams in the Big Ten, although Michigan State fans will probably argue about that. And you have the 2, really, the best conferences in college football, the ones that kind of dictate the terms, the SEC and the Big Ten. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but I'm just wondering if there's a scenario where the selection committee is trying to find an avenue for those 4 teams, 4 traditional powers in college football that will bring in a lot of eyeballs and bring up the ratings a little bit for those 4 teams to play in the college football playoff. I don't know. Conspiracy theory maybe, but I'm just thinking there might be an avenue, at least the committee hopes for, the selection committee, that those 4 teams play in the college football playoff. That's just my 2 cents, guys.
Yeah, I know. We were surprised too. Did not see that coming, but hey, it happened. I'll have to change my bottom of the barrel for the coming week because Kansas certainly earned their way out with that win. But there are plenty of other candidates to take their berth, if you will, because there are quite a few teams that have 1 win this season.
Well, and there's one of those coaches, one of those teams has a new coach, by the way.
Yes. For some of us, it's an old friend, Jim Mora Jr., formerly of UCLA, formerly of the Atlanta Falcons, an interesting guy with a bit of a high-speed motor, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yes. He's rather enthusiastic about his work.
Yes. And somebody that, if you had asked me for a top 25 list of people I thought might end up getting that job at UConn, I don't think he would have fallen on that list anywhere.
No. I mean, are you that enthusiastic about coaching that you will take any job anywhere? And I don't know. I mean, because some coaches are wired that way, that they want to coach.
And he said right out of the blocks that if he fully expects to make them successful, and half the fun is being able to take something like that and mold it into something all by itself.
Okay. You've got the order, sir. That is what we refer to as a tall one. So we'll see what it means to UConn and where they are next. But yeah, Jim Mora, the new Jim Mora Jr., the new head coach at UConn. I found that one rather interesting.
Yes, quite. Moving on to our friends in the SEC.
This one's going to take a while, so go ahead, dial it up.
Top-ranked Georgia Bulldogs in action this week in a CBS primetime game at 3:30 in their main slot for at least maybe another season before it moves over to ESPN. Georgia showed that Georgia is on a level unto itself yet again. Struggled a little bit out of the blocks, trailing 10-7 after 1 quarter, Tennessee, only to turn it on and end up winning the game 41-17.
Yeah. Really, what can you say? I mean, you look at Josh Heupel and what he's building, and I get it. I mean, Hendon Hooker had a really good first half, but I think that when a lot of folks are looking at the CFP, and we've made the joke before, and I don't think much has changed. That really, if the CFP's number 4 teams were the University of Georgia seniors, the University of Georgia juniors, the University of Georgia sophomores, and the University of Georgia freshmen, that would be a good run for 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the CFP. But I mean, right now it is Georgia and everybody else until we get to the SEC championship game, and let's see if Georgia kicks the edge of the end table with their bare feet and then stumbles in at a 2 or 3 where Alabama won't face them again until the championship, if that is how it is laid out.
It was interesting to me. I got to watch a little bit of this game, and Tennessee had them on their heels for a brief minute there at the beginning of the first quarter.
Yeah.
With that high-tempo, high-speed offense, Georgia didn't exactly know how to handle it. And I'm assuming that has to do with the fact that as much as you want to practice for it and plan for it, you really can't until you actually experience it. Because after the first 2 drives, Dan Lanning and Kirby Smart made some sort of an adjustment, and all of a sudden Georgia's defense looked like Georgia's defense.
Yeah.
And really Tennessee couldn't get anything going at that point until they got to garbage time late in the game. Great performance for James Cook on offense for the Bulldogs, 104 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, and a touchdown catch as well. Mm-hmm. It just looks like Georgia has a different gear than everybody else right now.
Yeah, it reminds you of Alabama from, say, 10 years ago. And it's run the ball, choke the clock out, get out of town. And I think that, seeing that with what we're seeing from the University of Georgia, where they just come at you in waves, And Stetson Bennett, continues to impress. I think that JT Daniels probably should have frequent portaling miles by this point. And
yeah,
he might
he's
be
not
on his
eligible.
way.
He's not eligible to go anywhere after this season. He's technically.
Technically, yes. So, but I mean, if you wanted to drop to 1AA or something like that, then you could continue to rock and roll. Then more power to you.
Yeah, don't even really need to mention much about the Alabama game. They played New Mexico State.
Oh, New Mexico State was up 3-0, by the way.
And about the time it took for your eye or my eye to blink, that changed. 59-3, Alabama wins in a laugher, to be expected. It was basically an exhibition game for the Crimson Tide.
That is true.
Couple games that were a little bit better to talk about. One, the Texas A&M and Ole Miss game, a game that, again, I predicted happening on the Dirty Dozen at bottom of the barrel, and that was the Rebels taking a 29-19 win in Vaught-Hemingway. Nice performance on defense for Ole Miss, believe it or not. I can't believe I'm saying that about a Lane Kiffin team.
I know.
But they shut Texas A&M down for a majority of the game. Zach Calzada was 24 for 42 and a couple of interceptions. The Rebels played good defense. Combine that with Matt Corral and a strong offense, and you got the instant recipe for a top 10 team here.
Yeah, and they just you have to have good Matt Corral, the one that makes all the sound judgments and doesn't get himself into places where he ends up injured, and they're having to try to recreate things offensively when it comes to what Lane Kiffin wants to do. And I think that once again, you look at the Colorado game, you look at the Auburn game, you look at the Ole Miss game, and I think that you see where defenses can sit there and they can keep Texas A&M in check. And I think that, once again, what I always say in a game like this is I think the tape is out on Texas A&M and how you can put pressure on Zach Calzada. And if you take away his larger targets like Wiedemeyer, then it's that much more difficult. Exactly. And Spiller in the running game, then it creates that much more of a challenge for Texas A&M to do things offensively. So tape's out. So let's see what the rest of the SEC West does about it.
Indeed, and the other thing that loss by A&M does is it clinches the SEC West for Alabama, who will be squaring off with Georgia at Mercedes-Benz Stadium come the first weekend in December for the SEC championship game. For Ole Miss, they got Vanderbilt next week, and they finish up with the Egg Bowl at Mississippi State, which, John, may not be such an easy game this year.
No, and you look at so we'll go ahead and kind of use that as your side door to get into Egg Bowl discussion.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going.
All right, so here's the deal. The boss and I were present for Mississippi State and Auburn, and legitimately, I will say this. I don't think Mississippi State is that good a football team. I really don't. And to what we saw from Auburn defensively was, and I guess we can take this in two halves. In the first half against Mississippi State, they played dime. They had 3 down linemen, 2 linebackers. One was kind of a spy on Jaquavius Marks or whoever was in the backfield if there was somebody, or it ended up being a spy on Will Rogers. You try to get pressure with 3. You played dime the entire first half. Everything was kept in front of you, and Mississippi State was able to do nothing offensively. Nothing.
That's the secret for beating a Mike Leach offense in most cases.
And what happened was the last drive of the second quarter, Mississippi State goes down to score. And you could tell at that point that Auburn's defense was a little gassed. Mississippi State was going to get the ball at the start of the second half as well. So you end up with that double whammy. You had a tired defense that did not adjust its philosophy. And I don't know if this falls on Derek Mason or if this falls on Brian Harsin, but they did not change from playing dime and having to play dime for as long as you did and not adjusting to putting pressure on the quarterback when you're up by 18 and then up 11. You tired your defense out. And what you saw from there was 9,722 unanswered points for Mississippi State to go on and win the game in Auburn. And what you saw offensively in the first half was Bo Nix working the passing game very well, because naturally a defense is going to key on Tank Bigsby, on Jarquez Hunter, on Sean Shivers, and the running game. Once again, coming out for the second half with a then 18-point lead, you did not deviate. And when you did deviate, you tried to take the life out of the game by trying to run the ball, which wasn't successful in the first place. So you ended up with a lot of short possessions and a lot more opportunities for Mississippi State to go down and score. So in my opinion, and this is just from me watching from 20,000 feet, Auburn's coaching staff's inability to adjust late in the second quarter and then again in the second half cost them this game. And by the time they tried to adjust defensively, it was far too late. Then when Auburn was pressed, you started getting wacky, crazy Bo Nix instead of Fran Tarkenton Bo Nix, who was making some great passes in the first half to Demetrius Robinson and Kobe Hudson. And this really falls on the coaching staff of Auburn here. And unless – go ahead. All right, go ahead and go for it. Now, what do you want?
What about the performance of Will Rogers from Mississippi State? I mean,
I chalk this up. I chalk that. I mean, literally, you look at this. I look at this in two separate ideas. I look at this in that 28-3, where Auburn was playing dime, had everything in front of them, had enough pressure on Will Rogers, and he was not able to produce. And then when Auburn fatigued and Auburn didn't adjust, Will Rogers was there, and it was just easy pickings. I'm not putting a whole lot of this on Will Rogers. I'm putting it on the fact that, oh, great, you got to complete a pass against tired defenses who didn't adjust.
The kid went 44 for 55, 450.
Because they abandoned the running game because they knew they were behind, and they continued to do it.
But it would stun me to see a Mike Leach team trying to run the ball. I mean, the numbers that Rodgers put up sounds like Gardner Minshew in prime Washington State days, or any number of quarterbacks at Washington State for Mike Leach. That's what they do.
Well, but once again, hey, honestly, like I said, I'm putting this solely on Auburn. And I think that the Egg Bowl will be interesting. I'm not going to deny you that, because I think it will be a shootout, because Mississippi's defense, for some reason, zones out and does whatever. I'm putting this more on the Auburn coaching staff and head coach Brian Harsin than I am on the success that we saw by Will Rogers. It's like, if you're tired, yeah, you're not going to be able to chase anybody down. And also there was another issue in scheme that was never addressed by Auburn. And we see this a lot, and it was just the next instance of this. When you have teams who have those large H-backs that we see, the large flex receivers, and they create matchup problems, Auburn failed to adjust with Austin Williams and Dylan Johnson. And they were consistently targeted in third down situations. And there were times, frankly, when Auburn's secondary failed to recognize that Austin Williams had a 7-yard cushion in double umbrella coverage with 6 defensive backs in, when you had like 3rd and 3, 4th and 2, short situations like that. There was a lot of recognition issues that were there as well, and it could have been confusing each other in coverage. I put this more, I know that you're putting this more on Mississippi State's offense. I'm putting this more on the coaching staff and a tired defense and an offense that started to press when they were being threatened and when they were down, and you get crazy wacky Bo Nix and stuff like that happens. I understand where you're coming from, but I will disagree with you, because the defense was gassed late second quarter, and then they still had another 2.5 quarters that they had to fight this, and it was just easy pickings for Will Rogers. Frankly, if he didn't get the numbers that he got, I really would have been surprised, and then I would have been disappointed that he didn't pick them apart as much as he did.
Yeah, we'll agree to disagree.
No question. Absolutely. And like I said, I know
you might see things through some Auburn colored glasses a little bit.
No, I mean,
shout out to Mississippi.
I was surrounded by Auburn people, but Mississippi State to me, they're not a very good team. They really aren't, and they can be easily put to bed. And Auburn to me completely ran out of gas and they didn't adjust. And so I put that more
Auburn's
on them.
that good of a team either. But
and honestly, when the season started, I had Auburn at 7-5.
Yeah, which is about where they're going to end up.
Yeah, right now they're at 6-4. They are at South Carolina, and then they come back, and everyone that I know of that I get to see through those Auburn-colored glasses, frankly, knows they're going to get killed by Alabama. I mean, that's just in the circle that I know. I don't know how many folks are sitting there saying, yeah, it's the Iron Bowl. They've got a chance. A lot of the folks in my circle, including the boss and all of her friends, are of the opinion they're going to get killed.
Yeah, we'll see. That's why they play the games. John, let's go ahead early here, or I shouldn't say early here. We've gone on for well over 30 minutes here in the first block of the show.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and toss it to the break here. And when we come back in about a minute and a half, I want to talk a little bit about Cincinnati because their games matter as well, and Oregon. And we'll hit that, a couple other news and notes, and we'll take a look ahead at Week 11, which I can't believe I'm saying it's Week 11 in college football,
really?
But here we are. All that and more when we come back for the second half of the review. You are listening to The Review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
We know that every driver is different, and a one-size policy does not fit all. That's why Country Financial offers a variety of discounts, so you get the coverage you need and the savings you deserve. From good driver to good student, multi-policy to multi-car, we've got a discount to suit every driver. Call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871 today to see what you could save. On Facebook at Jason Wright Agency, or by phone at 678-568-6871. Discounts vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Country Preferred Insurance Company, or Country Casualty Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, contact my friend Steve Apolinski of Apolinski & Associates. He's been representing individuals for over 30 years throughout Georgia and Alabama. Email him at steve@aa-legal.com or call him 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
The OSG app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Download the OSG app today.
62 yards for the win.
Thanks for sticking around, everybody. You have made it to the second half of the show. Before we get talking college football, got to do the obligatory promotional items here. Make sure you find us on social media at OSG Sports. And that goes for Facebook, that goes for Twitter, that goes for YouTube. But if you're watching us on YouTube, there's a pretty good chance you already know that. Also, we have a phone app. It's at OSG Sports. You guessed it. That's correct. At OSG Sports. Really original there.
Yes.
Go to the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. Look up OSG Sports. You'll find us. Download the app. It's free. You get all of our programming there, all in one handy-dandy little place. John, before we talk about Cincinnati and coaching hot seats, got a little bit of breaking news here.
Uh-oh.
Yep. I'll cut in the breaking news graphic and sound effect here. We have a coaching change in Washington. Jimmy Lake is no longer the coach in Seattle for the Washington Huskies. He's been relieved of duties just coming off of a week of where he was actually on suspension. His second season at Washington has been pretty close to an unmitigated disaster. The Huskies are 4-6 on the season after being expected to be a top 20 team. And quite honestly, I never thought he was the right fit, but obviously I didn't make that decision. Your interim coach will be, let me see here, who is that? Defensive coordinator Bob Gregory will take over to finish the season, and you can add Washington to the list of teams looking for a new head coach going into the 2022 season. Surprised?
Not necessarily, considering he was 4-6 this year. And then you look at the incident that was a couple of weeks ago where you basically try to overhand right with an open hand one of your players as you're trying to separate them in a brawl situation. That's not how that's supposed to go. When you lose to Oregon, you're not supposed to. I mean, I'm fairly certain that Coach Lake's hand probably hurt more than the player's head, considering it was an open-handed slap to the helmet. Terminated without cause. So I'm guessing that was part of this whole suspension and negotiation. So UW will owe his full buyout, just under $10 million, paid in monthly installments through January 2025, when his contract expires, minus any new compensation he earns during that time. Gregory was the head coach for the loss to Arizona State last weekend, so he's going to stick that way for the remainder of the season. They need to remember, at 4-6, they need to win their final 2 bowl games to not miss a bowl game for the first time since 2009. And remember, this season includes the season opening loss to Montana, the first time that Washington has lost to an FCS opponent. Promoted a head coach back in December 2019 after he was on the first 6 seasons under Chris Peterson. So Jimmy Lake, once again, out the door at UW, not necessarily a surprise considering what's happened the last 10 days or so.
Yeah, good football coach, clearly a better defensive coordinator than head coach, but I guess that's a conversation for another day.
Yep.
Moving on to games from this past week, we did not talk about them in the first block, but they are definitely worth a mention, and that's the Cincinnati Bearcats. They continue their winning ways, moving to 10-0 on the season with a 45-28 win over the struggling, shall we say, South Florida Bulls in Tampa.
Struggling, yes.
Again, not an incredible 59-3 kind of game like Alabama threw up on New Mexico, but a good solid win for the Bearcats.
Yeah, and once again, that's what we're looking for. If you're looking at the Bearcats and the CFP and you're trying to see if they're going to have any kind of party crashing going on, and it's about winning. It's about winning convincingly and continuing to make sure that you're a part of the discussion, however you do that. So once again, Cincinnati gets the Duke, and we just, if you're a fan of Luke Fickell and the Bearcats, you just try to make sure that you're still a part of the discussion, since we all know it's a popularity contest. So you have to make sure that you got that shipment of makeup in that makes you look really good.
And one other team that's teetering on the precipice of college football playoff bids for the season, the Oregon Ducks, took care of business, 38-24. They knock off Washington State. Not an incredibly dominating performance again for Oregon, much to the same way that Cincinnati's performed this season, but they're taking care of business.
Yeah, and once again, when we talk about Mario Cristobal, it's kind of like the SEC West has moved itself to the Pac-12, 14, or however the hell many teams they have right now. But once again, it's run the ball, use your athletes, get out the door. And if you put 38 on the board, then that's what you do. And sometimes you just distance yourself from everybody else. Anthony Brown had 17 for 123 and a score. So Mario Cristobal doing what they need to do out at Oregon to stay in the discussion at number 3.
I think the big test for them is coming up this week when they square off with Utah, but we'll talk about that game here in a couple of minutes. We would be derelict in our duty if we didn't talk about a game that was one of the more stranger games in recent college football memory. And I say that for a reason.
Oh, you should.
For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, go look up the story of the Florida versus Samford game and what should have been, and I say should have been, a cupcake matchup for the Gators.
In theory, yes.
It wasn't.
No, it was not.
Samford, who's a middle of the pack, mediocre FCS team, waltzed into the swamp and dropped 42 points on the Gators before they even knew what the heck was going on.
Correct.
Taking a 42-35 lead going into the half, only to end up losing to the Gators 70-52.
Well, Welch keeps it. He's through. Touchdown. Forget the odds.
And I think that, and you and I have known Chris Hatcher for
a
at least
long time.
At least 20 years. And I think that Hatch going in this game basically said, we're going to do our thing. We can't stop them because there's more of them, their butts are bigger, and they're more athletic. So what we're going to do our thing, and we're going to trade punches with them for as long as we can and do what we do. And for 3 quarters, Samford hung in there with Florida. And eventually then the athletes, and then just the, getting gassed and fatigued if you're a middle of the road FCS bunch that just caught up with them. But the fact of the matter.
Big shout out to Samford quarterback Liam Welch, by the way.
Aquinas from Augusta, 4 spins on the dial with the arm, and then other scores with his legs.
33, 52, 400, 3 touchdowns, and he ran for 2 more touchdowns.
Yep, and that was tremendous work that we saw from Liam Welch. And you look at Samford and what they did in trading punches with Florida for as long as they did. I do not know why Dan Mullen's locks were not changed on his office in the 3rd quarter. I do not know why he is still coaching at the University of Florida unless they're looking at the buyout and trying to figure out who can cut the check so he is no longer there. Then when after the game he's discussing, I think the question was phrased about, should you be disappointed for winning a game like this? And I'm paraphrasing. He said, why would you be disappointed, about losing a game like this?
It should be celebrated.
It should be celebrated, but it's detrimental to the game or something like that if you don't celebrate. Why is it then? It's just as detrimental for Dan Mullen to be referred to as a college football coach at the University of Florida with what happened on Saturday afternoon. He has zero business being the head football coach at the University of Florida after his comments about recruiting, after his loss to Georgia, and now his shootout win to Samford. Samford. Samford.
Yeah, Dan Mullen should be thanking Emory Jones for that one. Jones, to his credit, did all he could to keep the Gators in the game. He threw for 464 yards and 6 touchdowns, and then ran for 86 yards and a touchdown, counting for 42 points all by himself.
Yeah, and you and I got to see what Emory Jones was capable of at his time at Heard County, and to see Liam Welch from Aquinas in Augusta, small private school, do what he's doing in Chris Hatcher's system. I give Hatch a boatload of credit for the game plan that he came up with, even if it was throw up your hands and sit there and say, yep, we're just going to trade punches and go from there. It is what it is at this point. And, more power to Hatch. That's one of the best losses that I've seen from an FCS team in quite some time.
Very much so. And we'll leave this one with basically the description of Dan Mullen's seat currently ranging toward ghost or scorpion pepper territory.
3 Mile Island.
It's not if he gets fired, it's when, because the Gators finish up with, who do they finish up? I know they finished the season at Florida State, which it's a game that I wouldn't guarantee that they win. And Mullen's excuse can't use the firing of Todd Grantham last week as an excuse for that defense's performance.
No, the jokes were
writing
completely and totally justified about where Florida's defense didn't allow Samford to score 21 points in 3 consecutive quarters. That was a joke that was out there. And honestly, if you're Florida and you're 5-5, the 2 that you have left, you're at Missouri next weekend. You should win that one. So you'll be 6-5 against Florida State.
That.
Well, I know, considering what Missouri did this past week. But, you're 5-5, and what you have left on the board at Columbia to take on Missouri, and then you're at home Thanksgiving weekend to take on Florida State. So, it'll be intriguing to see what happens the next 2 weeks. but Dan Mullen has zero business being the head coach of the Florida Gators. Mike Norvell has zero business being head coach of the Florida State Seminoles, but that's just another matter entirely.
Yeah, but yet he managed to somehow, some way win a really bizarre but ugly game against the arch rival Miami Hurricanes.
And I will guarantee you this. 2 games are left for Florida State. What do you want to bet me that they finish 6-6, and that is the reason that Mike Norvell gets to stay? Because they finished 3 in a row to win the season.
That's
2 against your rivals.
That's progress, John. That's what they call progress.
Not interesting.
Never thought I would say this or anybody else would say it. And I actually, truth be told, I read this today.
Okay.
Who would have thought that Mike Norvell might be the second most secure coach in college football in the state of Florida right now, behind maybe Gus Malzahn?
Yeah.
There is no excuse for Florida performing like it is right now under Dan Mullen, none whatsoever, with the talent base that they have to choose from at this point in time. And I never thought, after what they did last season, who would have thought that they would have collapsed like this?
Yeah, and I think that, and then you see the video coming out of the locker room where they're all dancing around and celebrating because they beat Samford.
Yeah, the only thing missing was the students storming the field.
Give it time.
A couple things I wanted to mention before we move on to next week's schedule. Big shout out to Texas Tech, who wins their game at the buzzer against Iowa State when Jonathan Garibay drills a 62-yard field goal.
Now, did you see the video of the field goal?
I did not.
Jonathan Garibay, the boot is away, and it's goal!
Garibay put so much into it that he literally jumped off the ground in his follow-through. I mean, he threw so much into it. He makes contact with the ball with his right. And, most kickers, they'll sit there and they'll plant the plant foot, and then everything will go through, and then you'll know if it's a howitzer or not or anything like that. Garibay planted his foot, literally as he's going up, he makes contact with the ball, hits it so hard he's jumping up off the ground with his left after he's making contact with it.
Yep, the longest field goal made this season. Garibay's that was his 10th made field goal of the season. He's 10 for 10.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations to him. Nice win for the Red Raiders.
Walk-off win for the Red Raiders!
Okay, and here's another side note from that game that, and I give Texas Tech a lot of credit for it. The game, there were a lot of calls, and I know that this is a separate show in and of itself about targeting and all that kind of stuff, but there were a lot of calls in the game that were going after review were the correct calls, but they were going against Texas Tech. As Iowa State was driving down to trim the margin from 10 to possibly 3 with a score, the student section at Texas Tech decides it's a real cool thing to start throwing bottles on the field at the officiating crew.
Oh.
So the officials stopped the game, and they had security in Lubbock shift the student section over one entire section. Basically, the 2 sections that were in the end zone, the one that was closest to the exit out to the concourse or exit to the locker rooms, and then the big student section.
Yeah, they sit right there where the team runs out. I've worked a game there.
Right, so they sit there in those 2 sections. Security forced the students to slide over one entire section. So you basically had 2 empty spaces around that exit, but props to the security at Texas Tech and to the administration for moving the student body in a situation that they shouldn't have created in the first place.
One other crazy play that we got to talk about before we move on here.
Oh, are you going to run the audio of this one?
Yes, I am going to run the audio of this one. South Dakota gets the win in their rivalry game against South Dakota State on a 57-yard Hail Mary pass at the buzzer.
It's going to go around the 5. The ball's tipped in the air, still being tipped. Caught! Touchdown, South Dakota!
Carson Camp heaves the ball as far as he can into the end zone. It bounces around and lands in the lap of receiver Jeremiah Webb. touchdown, game over, South Dakota wins. Webb's first career touchdown catch.
Thanks for dropping by. Now that was getting to, if you're an announcer and you get a moment like that, those are just absolutely priceless. And so watching that one on video, I know what those moments are like, especially in rivalry games. And so it was a great finish in a great rivalry that we've had the chance to catch up with both sides for various games on the Rivalries and Trophy Game show here on the network in the past.
Second straight win for South Dakota in the series after losing their previous 10. Nicely done.
Yes. Nicely
done. Well, it's that time of the show where we look ahead to next week, John. And next week, I can't believe I'm saying it, we're almost out of the college football season.
Bite your tongue, sir. There's no such thing.
I know. We're hitting week 12. It's do or die time. Everybody's making their final push. We're starting to inch into rivalry week games, as evidenced by the South Dakota State conversation we just had. And there's a whole slew of matchups this coming week, beginning on Tuesday the 16th, running all the way through the weekend. Some of the bigger, badder, and most important matchups. Michigan State making the traveling into the Horseshoe in Columbus. They take on Ohio State in a noon kickoff. Excuse me. This one could very well decide who's going to be the Big Ten champ.
Yeah, and you're looking at this one, and we've seen what Mel Tucker has been able to build in his second season in East Lansing. And by the way, the uniforms that they wore this past weekend, those need to be burned and thrown in the trash. Yes, I know your state because you're green and you have a Spartan on and you play in the Big 10, 12, 14. I know your state. I don't need it advertised in Times New Roman 40 font across the front of the jersey.
It's the extra marketing dollars.
Oh, no question. That's not in dispute. It's an ugly, ugly jersey. Yeah, Michigan State, this is one of those games that Mel Tucker can hang his hat on. And if you're Ohio State, this is one where C.J. Stroud continues to solidify his push to be Heisman Trophy candidate / Heisman Trophy favorite C.J. Stroud. And that's, for me, you're going to have the running game of Michigan State going up against a very tough defense in Ohio State, and Stroud going up against a very tough defense for Michigan State. So who blinks? I think it's Michigan State by the end of the day. I don't think that the margins are going to be very big, but I would be shocked if this one is more than 2 touchdowns.
Take the over in this one, I
think.
Take
the over quickly. Yes, sir.
Both teams are high-scoring squads. The Michigan State defense has struggled some and has proven to be vulnerable in the past. I think that might be an issue this week. Yep. Another game that's interesting to me, and it's only interesting because Wake Forest is right now the top dog in the ACC, which is a sentence I've never thought I would really actually ever have to say.
No, that's why J-Dub's out this week. He's still stunned over that.
But they have to travel down to Death Valley and play Clemson at Clemson. Clemson has, to put it mildly, struggled this season, but they have shown some signs of life here over the last couple of weeks. This is a dangerous, dangerous game for Wake Forest.
No question. And if you're looking to get in the door through your favorite secondary ticket marker, you can get in for as low as $20 to get in and see this one. That shows you where things are right now with Clemson. And I think that if Clemson wants to hang their head on something and start building toward 2022, these are the kind of games when you can do it. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm not going to call this a trap game for Wake Forest, considering what we know from Clemson, but it will be one of their sternest tests of the year.
Indeed, it will. Some other key matchups this week. I'm not sure that this is going to be a game that Alabama loses, but it could be interesting based on what Arkansas did earlier in the season.
True.
As the Razorbacks take the trip to Tuscaloosa to square off with Alabama. Alabama coming off a practice game this past week.
Yeah.
In pretty good health, pretty good shape as they clinch due to Texas A&M losing. They have officially clinched the SEC West. Well, actually, I take back what I just said. I misspoke.
Oh.
Arkansas beats Alabama, and I think it still has a chance.
Okay. Well, so it's still in play, but I still think that as much as we all had Sam Pittman in our early discussion for National Coach of the Year, He still should be in the discussion for what he's been able to do at Arkansas, but I think that this one's Alabama's. I think it turns into another showcase game for Bryce Young, and it's probably at the very least probably a 3-touchdown win by the end of the day.
Another game that intrigues me a little bit, and it's not featuring two of the bigger name teams in the country. UAB takes a trip down to San Antonio in the Alamo Dome to take on undefeated UTSA, who barely squeaked out a win over Southern
Miss.
Yeah, bottom of the barrel member Southern Miss last.
I know
week.
that game was tied at 17. I want to say before UTSA finally put the pedal down late.
Could be a game that spells the first loss of the season, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think that I would have said if this was in Birmingham, I probably would have said that. I think that what you see in San Antonio at the Alamo Dome with UTSA, I think that they get the Duke here. It'll be another tough one. It wouldn't surprise me, honestly, since we've been talking about it. It wouldn't surprise me if UTSA was looking past Southern Miss to this game, and that might be why they had to struggle through what happened this past weekend. Friend of the network, Rex Castillo, down at WRBL TV, an alum of Texas San Antonio, is loving every single minute of all of this when it comes to his undefeated Roadrunners. I think Texas San Antonio wins. I think UAB covers. I think it's going to be a tight one, but I've got to go with UTSA here.
Yeah, have to agree with you on that one. I'm mentioning this next game only because I'm going to actually be there in attendance.
Yeah.
The BYU Cougars make the trip down to Statesboro, Georgia, to take on my Georgia Southern Eagles. I don't pretend to believe for a minute that my Eagles will win the game,
right,
but it's going to be interesting, and I'll make sure we discuss it a little bit when I come back for next week's episode. But I'm excited. I get to see a ranked team go down to Paulson Stadium to take on the Eagles. I haven't seen them play in person for a very, very long time.
Yep.
And a full report forthcoming. Some other matchups here to note. We mentioned this when we were talking about Oregon. Oregon has to travel to Salt Lake City and take on the number 24 ranked Utah.
Mm-hmm. I think that
one's road game could be a tough one.
I think so. I think it'll be a lot tougher than folks may initially think. I think Oregon wins. I think Utah covers. And I think it'll be a great atmosphere at Rice Eccles.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other games that jump up? Almost walked past this one, and I have to mention it only because it's the Battle of Los Angeles.
Oh, God.
UCLA at USC.
I'm sorry. Yeah, good
Next
on
question,
you.
Please.
Next question, please. I'll give you one that's off the beaten track. 4:00 kick. Louisiana at Liberty.
Ooh.
Malik Willis will try to see if he ends up being a finalist and heads to New York. He's going to have to put up some big numbers for the rest of the season. But I like this one with Billy Napier in Louisiana going up to see Hugh Freeze and Liberty. Once again, this is another one where I think if you take the over, it's a safe play. So let's put that one on the board. That one's on the U at 4:00. That game still may be going on by the time we come back and visit you next week.
The Rajon Cajuns, winners of 9 straight games after an opening week loss to the Texas Longhorns.
There it is.
Yeah, the alumni in the house speaking up there. A loss that's kind of looking more surprising by the week based on Texas's problems, but that's a whole other conversation as well.
That is true.
Really, that covers most of the games that look interesting on the schedule.
That is true.
Don't have a whole lot left. Nothing else is watch.
Pretty much, exactly. So Louisiana is at Liberty, and then they finish up with ULM in a division game. It looks like Louisiana's obviously they've won the West in the Fun Belt, and now the street fight with App State, Georgia State, and Coastal Carolina. And
Coastal's reeling a little bit. They just lost to Georgia State this past week, so I think
that was
App State's in the driver's seat there.
Yeah. App State's at 5-1. State and Coastal are at 4-2. State would obviously have the tiebreaker. Troy needs some help to hopscotch over some folks with 2 to go, and App State to lose out. So the Sun Belt Championship game could end up being App and Louisiana. And once again, 2 cool programs that have been flying below the radar because not a lot of folks focus on the Fun Belt. But yeah, look at Louisiana at Liberty in Lynchburg, Virginia at 4:00 on the U Eastern time.
your recommended viewing for the week. I think we could kind of go ahead and put a wrap on things here, John.
Why don't we put a wrap on things?
You got anything else you want to talk about? Or are you good?
I think we talked about South Dakota State. Yes, I think we're good, except for, I think what I have to do is what I traditionally do before we go for those who are watching on the video side of things.
Oh, wait, real quick.
Here's the OSG.
Before you do your phone app thing.
Yeah.
We didn't mention the top-ranked Georgia Bulldogs, but we didn't mention them for a reason, because they have their practice game this week as they host Charleston Southern.
Yeah, so good for you. I think JT Daniels will get some reps in that one. So good.
I think the water boy might get some reps in that one.
You ain't kidding. So all the walk-ons will get their time in the third and fourth quarter. Here's my standard video of the Monster Chiller Horror Theater 3D close-up from Count Floyd when it comes to the OSG Sports app, available iOS and Android for those of you watching on the video version. Phil, send us home.
Download it today. With all that, it's time to bid everybody adieu. That's the only French word I know besides French fries, so I'll say it. For OSG Nelson, I am OSG Phil, and for Wilkie and Wilkie's World, and the injured list laden brother J-Dub, we are the Online Sports Guys. Thanks for listening to our show. We always appreciate you. Let us know what you think. Reach out at OSG Sports on Facebook and Twitter. We're there. We'll try and answer you if we can. Until then, enjoy your week, everybody. It's a long week of college football fun beginning on Tuesday, and we'll be back again to talk about it all this coming next week. Until then, so long, everybody. Bye-bye.